I'm 36 years old, Nadia, a successful graphic designer in Boston. As I gaze at the snowy mountain view from my new home on Christmas Eve, my phone sits silent, no notifications from family, just like every year. They've forgotten to invite me again. But this year is different. I made a bold decision that changed everything. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I turned years of holiday heartbreak into the most healing Christmas of my life. Growing up in the suburbs of Seattle, I was part of what looked like a typical middle-class American family from the outside. My father Thomas taught high school history, and my mother Karen was a nurse at the local hospital. With my older brother James and younger sister Lily, we were the picture-perfect family of five. But being the middle child meant I often felt invisible. James was the athletic star bringing home trophies that Dad proudly displayed in the living room. Lily was the baby of the family, naturally receiving extra attention and affection. I was just there. Not remarkable enough to earn special praise, not young enough to need extra care. Despite feeling overlooked most of the year, Christmas was different. Christmas was magical. It was the one time when our family truly felt connected, when I felt like I belonged. We had so many beautiful traditions. Every December, Mom would spend an entire weekend baking cookies from recipes handed down through generations. The smell of ginger and cinnamon would fill our home as Christmas music played in the background. Dad would take us to select the perfect tree from a local farm, and we'd spend hours decorating it together, carefully hanging ornaments, while sharing stories about where each one came from. On Christmas Eve, we would each open one present before heading to bed. Christmas morning meant matching pajamas, a big breakfast, and taking turns opening gifts while sitting in a circle on the living room floor. These memories were precious to me because they represented rare moments when I felt truly part of our family unit. Nadia, you hang the star this year, my father said one Christmas when I was 12. I remember the pride I felt as he lifted me onto his shoulders, the star clutched carefully in my hands. For once, I was the center of attention, the one with an important job. The way everyone clapped when the tree was complete made me feel special in a way I rarely experienced. Another Christmas stands out in my memory. I was 14 and had spent weeks saving my allowance to buy gifts for everyone. For Mom, I found a delicate silver bracelet with a heart charm. For Dad, a book by his favorite author that had just been released. For James, a signed poster from his favorite band. And for Lily, a hand-painted music box with a ballerina inside. I wrapped each gift carefully, adding special tags and ribbons. When they opened them, their faces lit up with genuine surprise and joy. Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "This is so thoughtful, Nadia." That moment of recognition and appreciation felt like the greatest gift I could have received. As high school progressed, I discovered my passion for art and design. While James excelled at sports and Lily performed in school plays, I spent hours in the art room developing my skills. My art teacher recognized my talent and encouraged me to apply to design schools. When I received an acceptance letter from a prestigious design program in New York, I was ecstatic. Finally, I had accomplished something noteworthy, something that would make my family proud. The night I shared my news at dinner, my father nodded and said, "That's nice, Nadia," before quickly turning the conversation to James's upcoming championship game. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, but didn't redirect the conversation back to my achievement. It was a pattern I'd grown accustomed to, but it still stung. Packing for college, I convinced myself that distance would make my family appreciate me more, that my absence would create a Nadia-shaped hole they'd feel compelled to fill with phone calls, care packages, and eager invitations to return home for holidays. I left for New York with high hopes that my new journey would somehow reset our family dynamic and finally earn me the place I'd always yearned for. My college years in New York were transformative. I thrived in the creative environment, made friends who appreciated my artistic sensibilities, and began to develop my own unique style as a designer. But despite building a new life, I still longed for connection with my family back in Seattle. During my freshman year, I called home weekly, eagerly sharing stories about my classes, my projects, and the excitement of city life. The conversations were often brief, with mom or dad frequently cutting them short with excuses about needing to get somewhere or having something on the stove. Still, I made the effort, sending photos of my artwork and projects, hoping for acknowledgement or praise that rarely came. My first Christmas break was relatively normal. I flew home, participated in our traditions, and though I still felt somewhat peripheral to the family excitement, I was included in the celebrations. I returned to school believing that my fears of being forgotten were just insecurities I needed to overcome. Then came sophomore year. As November rolled into December, I waited for the usual call from mom discussing my travel plans for Christmas. But the call never came. I sent texts asking about the holiday schedule, receiving only vague responses. "We're still figuring things out," or "I'll let you know soon." 2 weeks before Christmas, when I still hadn't received any concrete plans, I called home directly. Dad answered, sounding distracted. "Oh, Christmas, I thought you'd be staying in New York this year," he said, confusion evident in his voice. "Why would I stay here alone?" I asked, my heart beginning to sink. "Well, you've got friends there, don't you? And New York is so exciting during the holidays. Your mother and I just assumed." His voice trailed off, and in the background I could hear the familiar sounds of Christmas preparations, the holiday music, the clanging of baking sheets, my sister's laughter. "You're already getting ready for Christmas," I stated, rather than ask, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Well, yes, we always do around this time," he replied, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to begin holiday preparations without ensuring all family members were included. After an uncomfortable silence, he added, "Of course you're welcome to come home, Nadia. We didn't think you'd want to." I hung up the phone feeling hollow. Rather than calling back to argue or plead for proper inclusion, I made a decision. I would go home anyway, surprise them, and perhaps seeing me would remind them of what they'd nearly missed. I used most of my semester's savings to book a last-minute flight to Seattle. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, imagining the happy surprise on their faces when I walked through the door. When my taxi pulled up to our house on December 23rd, I could see the warm glow of Christmas lights through the windows, the shadows of people moving about inside. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the front door and used my key to enter. The scene that greeted me was exactly as I'd imagined. The tree beautifully decorated, the smell of Christmas cookies in the air, holiday music playing softly. But the expressions on my family's faces were not the joyful surprise I had anticipated. Instead, they looked startled, almost uncomfortable. "Nadia," my mother recovered first, coming forward to hug me. "We didn't expect you." "That's obvious," I said, trying to keep my tone light despite the heaviness in my chest. "We thought you were staying in New York," my father explained, echoing our phone conversation. "You should have told us you were coming." "I wanted it to be a surprise," I replied, my voice small. "It's Christmas. I thought you'd want me here." My mother exchanged a glance with my father before saying, "Of course we want you here, honey. It's just that well, we didn't set up your room. We've been using it to store gifts and things." "That's okay," I said quickly. "I can sleep on the couch." The evening proceeded with an undercurrent of tension. I tried to integrate myself into their established rhythm, offering to help with baking or gift wrapping, but it felt like trying to join a dance where everyone else knew the steps except me. During dinner, James enthusiastically shared stories about his college football team's winning season, and Lily talked about being selected for a prestigious summer program. My parents listened attentively, asking questions and offering praise. When I attempted to share news about a design competition I'd placed in, my mother nodded politely before turning to ask Lily more about her plans. I went to bed that night on our living room couch, staring at the Christmas tree lights, wondering how I could feel so alone in a house full of people who were supposed to love me. The next day, Christmas Eve, followed a similar pattern. I participated in our traditions, but felt like an audience member rather than a participant. When it came time to open our traditional Christmas Eve present, I noticed there wasn't one for me under the tree. "Oh," my mother exclaimed, looking genuinely distressed. "We didn't I didn't get a special Eve gift for you, Nadia. I'm so sorry. I really did think you were staying in New York." "It's fine," I said automatically, the words feeling hollow. Really, it's not a big deal. But it was a big deal. It was confirmation of what I'd been feeling, that I was an afterthought, someone who could be easily forgotten or left out of family plans. I returned to New York after the holidays with a weight in my heart that hadn't been there before. The pattern had been established, and it would only grow more pronounced in the years to come. After graduating with honors from design school, I decided against returning to Seattle. The Christmas incident during sophomore year had been just the beginning of a pattern that made it clear where I stood in my family's priorities. Instead, I accepted a position with a boutique design firm in Boston, determined to build a life where my presence mattered. In the 5 years that followed, I worked relentlessly, channeling my hurt into professional ambition. My talent and work ethic paid off. I rose quickly through the ranks, eventually becoming the lead designer on accounts for national brands. My designs appeared on billboards and magazine spreads and across social media platforms. I'd achieved the kind of success that should have made any family proud. Despite the growing distance, I continued making efforts to maintain connections with my family. I sent thoughtful birthday gifts, called on holidays, and tried to keep up with their lives through regular check-ins. The responses were always cordial, but brief. My parents seemed interested in my life in the most superficial way, rarely asking follow-up questions about my work or relationships. Then the forgetting pattern expanded beyond Christmas. When my father turned 60, I learned about the celebration through a casual mention during a phone call with my mother the week after. "The party was lovely," she said. "James brought his new girlfriend and everyone adored her." "Party?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "For your father's birthday. It was just a small gathering, nothing fancy. We didn't think you'd want to travel all the way from Boston for something so small." But the photos I later saw on my sister's social media told a different story. It wasn't a small gathering at all, but a significant celebration with extended family and friends from throughout my father's life. There was a professional photographer, custom decorations, and even a slideshow of family memories, many of which I was noticeably absent from. When my sister Lily graduated from college, I had to discover the date through her Instagram post the morning of the ceremony. "Ready to walk across that stage today," the caption read, accompanied by a photo of her in her cap and gown flanked by our beaming parents. I called immediately, hurt and confused. "Today is your graduation. Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Oh," Lily sounded genuinely surprised. "I thought Mom would have mentioned it. But it's not that big a deal, just the ceremony and a small lunch after." Again, social media revealed the truth. A graduation celebration that included a fancy dinner at an upscale restaurant and a weekend at a beachside rental with extended family. Perhaps the most painful incident was James's wedding. 6 weeks before the event, I received a text message from him. "Hey sis, just checking if you got your invitation to the wedding, need to finalize numbers for the caterer." I hadn't received any invitation. When I told him so, there was a long pause before his response. "That's weird. We sent them out months ago. I'll have Andrea send you the details." 3 days later, a digital invitation arrived in my email, clearly not part of the original batch of invitations others had received. During the wedding weekend, I discovered I'd been seated at a table with distant cousins rather than at the family table. When I asked my mother about it, she shrugged. The seating was very complicated. I'm sure it wasn't intentional. But the pattern was too consistent to be accidental. Each time I confronted my family about these oversights, they had ready explanations that made me feel unreasonable for being upset. "We thought you'd be too busy. We assumed you wouldn't want to travel. It was put together at the last minute." I began to doubt myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining slights where none existed? Was it normal for families to operate this way? The Christmas exclusions continued year after year, becoming so predictable that I stopped asking about plans altogether. I created my own traditions, volunteering at a local shelter, taking myself on a solo trip, or accepting invitations from friends who noticed I never went home for the holidays. But nothing prepared me for the Christmas 3 years ago, when I discovered through an inadvertent tag on social media that my entire family had gone on a holiday ski trip to Aspen. Parents James and his wife Lily and her boyfriend, all together in matching Christmas sweaters, smiling from a luxury cabin in the mountains. No one had mentioned this trip to me, not even in passing. I sat alone in my Boston apartment, scrolling through photo after photo of my family enjoying the holiday I so cherished completely without me. There were snapshots of them opening gifts, cooking dinner together, playing board games by a roaring fire. In one particularly painful image, they held up glasses in a toast, the caption reading, "Perfect Family Christmas." Perfect family. Except I wasn't there. I wasn't even missed. I called my mother the next day, unable to contain my hurt. "Why didn't anyone tell me about the Aspen trip?" I asked, my voice tight with the effort of not crying. "Oh, Nadia," she sighed. "It was a last-minute thing. James got a deal through a work connection, and you're always so busy with your career. We didn't want to disrupt your plans." "What plans?" I asked. "Did anyone even ask if I had plans?" "Well, no, but you never come home for Christmas anymore, so we just assumed." "I don't come home because no one invites me," I said, finally giving voice to the truth I'd been avoiding. "That's not true," my mother protested, but her tone lacked conviction. "You're always welcome. You know that." But I didn't know that. In fact, all evidence pointed to the contrary. I spent that evening alone in my apartment, Christmas lights twinkling mockingly in the window, my phone silent beside me. No calls, no texts. Not even a Merry Christmas from the people who were supposed to care about me most in the world. Last Christmas marked a turning point. After seeing the Aspen photos and having yet another dismissive conversation with my mother, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of accepting defeat and spending another holiday alone in my apartment, I would go home unannounced. I needed to see for myself what Christmas looked like when they thought I wouldn't be there. I finished a major project early, clearing my schedule for the days before Christmas. I prepared meticulously, buying thoughtful gifts for everyone, baking my grandmother's famous gingerbread cookies from a recipe I'd saved years ago, and even picking up a special bottle of scotch for my father. The journey was grueling. A winter storm had hit the Pacific Northwest, delaying flights and making travel chaotic. I spent 6 hours in the Chicago airport during a layover, surrounded by frustrated holiday travelers and crying children. By the time I landed in Seattle, I was exhausted but determined. I rented a car and drove carefully through the snowy streets to my parents' suburban home. It was Christmas Eve around 7 p.m. when I pulled up to the curb a few houses down from my childhood home. I didn't park in the driveway, wanting to maintain the element of surprise. Through the falling snow, I could see that the house was lit up beautifully, Christmas lights adorning every edge, the large tree visible through the front window. As I approached carrying my bags of gifts and home-baked goods, I noticed there were more cars parked nearby than I expected. Not just my parents' vehicles and those belonging to James and Lily, but others I didn't recognize. My pace slowed as I realized they were hosting a gathering, one I knew nothing about. Rather than ringing the doorbell immediately, I found myself drawn to the large bay window at the front of the house. The curtains were partly open, offering a clear view into the living room. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. My family was hosting a full Christmas party. At least 15 people filled the living room and spilled into the dining area. I recognized aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, people I'd known all my life. They were laughing, drinking, and enjoying what appeared to be a festive holiday buffet. Christmas music played, and the scene was everything a family Christmas should be. Except I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even been told. I stood in the cold snow, accumulating on my shoulders and hair, watching this tableau of family joy that had no place for me in it. I felt like a ghost, observing a life I should have been part of, but somehow wasn't. I was about to turn away when I heard voices coming closer to the window. My mother and Aunt Susan were standing near the Christmas tree, wine glasses in hand, their voices carrying through the glass. "Everything looks beautiful, Karen," Aunt Susan was saying. "You've outdone yourself this year." "Thank you," my mother replied, looking pleased. "It's so nice having everyone together." "Almost everyone," Aunt Susan commented. "Nadia couldn't make it again." There was a pause before my mother answered, and I held my breath waiting. "Actually, it's probably for the best Nadia isn't here. She always makes things more complicated than they need to be. You remember last time she came home? She spent the whole visit making comments about how successful she is in Boston, as if we're supposed to roll out a red carpet because she designs logos or whatever it is she does. I felt as if I'd been slapped. I had never bragged about my career. If anything, I downplayed my accomplishments, afraid of being seen as attention-seeking. "She's just so different from the rest of us," my mother continued. "Always has been. James and Lily just fit in naturally, you know. With Nadia, it's always been work." Before Aunt Susan could respond, my father joined them, putting an arm around my mother's shoulders. "What are we talking about over here?" he asked cheerfully. "Just saying it's nice to have a peaceful Christmas," my mother replied. My father nodded. "We stopped actively inviting Nadia years ago. She's got her own life now, and frankly, it's less stressful for everyone this way." "Dad," Lily appeared, looking slightly uncomfortable. "That sounds awful when you say it like that." My father shrugged. "It's just the truth. Nadia always has to be special, always has to stand out. She never could just blend in with the family like you and James." Lily laughed, though it seemed a bit forced. "Remember when she showed up 2 years ago unannounced? Mom had to scramble to find gifts to wrap for her so she wouldn't feel left out." The conversation moved on as they drifted away from the window, but I remained frozen in place, their words echoing in my head. This wasn't a case of forgetting to include me. They had deliberately excluded me year after year, holiday after holiday, family event after family event. The realization hit me with crushing force. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been rejected. Numbly, I turned away from the window and walked back to my rental car. The bags of gifts and baked goods felt impossibly heavy now. I placed them in the trunk, knowing I would never deliver them. As I sat behind the wheel, tears finally came hot and fast, blurring the festive lights of my childhood home. I drove back to Seattle in a daze, barely registering the treacherous road conditions. By some miracle, I made it safely to my hotel, where I spent Christmas Eve alone, room service turkey dinner growing cold, as I stared blankly at a cheery holiday movie playing on the hotel TV. Christmas morning, I changed my return flight and was back in my Boston apartment by evening. I unpacked the gifts I'd brought, placing them in the back of my closet, where I wouldn't have to look at them. Then I sat on my couch in the dark, illuminated only by the small pre-lit tree I'd set up weeks ago, and allowed myself to fully feel the pain of knowing that my suspicions had been confirmed in the cruelest possible way. I wasn't forgotten. I was unwanted. The months following that devastating Christmas were some of the darkest of my life. January and February passed in a blur of work and isolation. I threw myself into projects, often staying at the office until late at night, preferring the distraction of deadlines to the emptiness of my apartment. I cut off contact with my family entirely. I didn't call on my parents' anniversary in February or my father's birthday in March. When my mother texted asking if everything was okay, I replied with brief, non-committal messages that discouraged further conversation. I couldn't bring myself to confront them with what I'd heard. The truth was too painful, and part of me feared that a direct confrontation would only lead to denials that would make me question my own reality. My friends noticed the change in me. "You're not yourself," my closest friend Rachel observed over coffee one weekend. "You've been withdrawn for months. What's going on?" I couldn't bring myself to share the full story, settling instead for a vague explanation about family issues. Rachel didn't press, but her concern was evident. "Whatever it is, don't go through it alone," she advised. But alone was exactly how I felt and how I preferred to be. I declined social invitations, avoided office gatherings, and spent weekends either working or binge-watching mindless television shows that required no emotional investment. By April, my boss Jennifer pulled me aside after a client meeting. "Your work is as excellent as ever, Nadia," she said, "but I'm worried about you. You've taken on every project available your working weekends, and frankly, you look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Her genuine concern cracked something in me. Before I could stop myself, I was telling her everything. The years of being forgotten, the overheard conversation at Christmas, the painful realization that my family had deliberately excluded me from their lives. Jennifer listened without interruption, her expression compassionate. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or try to minimize what had happened. Instead, she said, "I think you need some time away, not just from work, but from your regular environment. A chance to clear your head and decide what you want your life to look like going forward." She told me about an upcoming project, a rebranding campaign for a luxury ski resort in Vermont. They want us to capture the beauty of the area in all 4 seasons, starting with spring. It would mean spending at least 2 weeks on location. I was going to send Brian, but I think you'd be perfect for it. The change of scenery might do you good. I accepted, immediately grateful for the opportunity to escape Boston and my ruminating thoughts. 2 weeks later, I was driving through the verdant mountains of Vermont, the spring landscape a stark contrast to the emotional winter I'd been living in. The resort was nestled in a picturesque valley, surrounded by mountains that reminded me of paintings rather than real landscapes. My accommodations were a small cabin on the property, rustic but comfortable, with a deck overlooking a stream that ran through the grounds. The work was challenging in the best way, requiring me to immerse myself in the natural beauty of the area and translate it into visual concepts that captured the essence of the resort. I spent my days exploring hiking trails, talking with local residents, and photographing everything from wildflowers to mountain vistas. For the first time in months, I found myself sleeping soundly, waking naturally with the sunrise, instead of to the jarring alarm after a night of restless tossing and turning. The constant knot in my chest began to loosen as I breathed the clean mountain air and absorbed the peaceful rhythms of rural life. During my second week there, I struck up a conversation with a local real estate agent named Ethan at a cafe in the nearby town. He was friendly and knowledgeable about the area, offering suggestions for off-the-beaten-path locations that would make for stunning photographs. "If you're interested in really spectacular views," he said, "there's an open house tomorrow at a property about 20 minutes from here. It's a mountain home on 5 acres with vistas that will take your breath away. I'm hosting the showing if you'd like to come by. No pressure to buy, of course," he added with a laugh. "Just thought you might want to capture some shots from the property for your project." I accepted the invitation out of professional curiosity, with no intention of doing anything other than possibly taking some photos. The next afternoon, I followed Ethan's directions up a winding mountain road until I reached a clearing with a single home perched on the edge of a ridge. The house was a modern interpretation of a traditional log cabin, with expansive windows and a wraparound deck that seemed to float among the treetops. Inside, the open floor plan centered around a massive stone fireplace, with the living area oriented toward floor-to-ceiling windows that framed a view of the surrounding mountains. "The previous owners built it as a vacation home," Ethan explained as he showed me around. "They're retiring to Florida and don't use it enough to justify keeping it. It's been on the market for a few months. The location is a bit remote for most buyers looking in this area." I wandered through the rooms in a daze, barely hearing his sales pitch. There was something about the house that resonated with me on a level I couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't just the stunning architecture or the breathtaking views. It was a feeling, a sense of peace and possibility that I hadn't experienced in a very long time. As I stood on the deck watching the afternoon light play across the valley below, a wild thought occurred to me. What if I bought this house? It seemed absurd. I lived in Boston. My job was there. My life was there. Yet standing in that spot, I felt more at home than I had anywhere in recent memory. That night in my cabin, I couldn't stop thinking about the mountain house. I pulled up my financial information on my laptop and began running numbers. Over the years, I'd been diligent about saving and investing. I lived well below my means in Boston and had accumulated a substantial emergency fund and investment portfolio. I also owned a small percentage of equity in my design firm, which had grown in value as the company expanded. If I liquidated some investments and used most of my savings, I could potentially make a down payment. The mortgage payments would stretch my budget, but with some lifestyle adjustments and perhaps taking on additional freelance work, it might be doable. But was I really considering this? Buying a house in Vermont on an emotional impulse? It seemed reckless, impractical, possibly even self-destructive. Yet, as I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I found myself contemplating a question that had been lurking beneath the surface since Christmas. What did home and family really mean to me now? For years, I'd been chasing approval and inclusion from people who had made it clear they didn't want to give it. I'd structured my life around a hole that would never be filled. What if instead I created something new? What if I built a life and a home that were entirely mine, defined by my choices, rather than by my relationship to others. The more I thought about it, the more right it felt. Not as an escape or a retreat, but as a positive step forward, a declaration of what I valued and how I wanted to live. The next morning, I called Ethan and asked to see the house again. This time, I came with a list of practical questions about the property, the area, and what it would mean to live there part-time or eventually full-time. By the end of the day, I had made an offer. The negotiation process took several weeks, during which I returned to Boston and continued working. I told no one about my potential purchase, feeling that speaking about it might somehow jinx it, or that others would try to talk me out of what they'd see as an impulsive decision. When my offer was accepted, I felt a surge of both exhilaration and terror. Was I really doing this? But as I began the process of securing financing and scheduling inspections, the terror gave way to a growing sense of excitement and purpose. By early August, the house was mine. I stood in the empty living room after the closing keys in hand, watching the afternoon sunlight filter through the trees outside. For the first time since learning the truth about my family's feelings toward me, I felt something like hope. This space was mine. This view was mine. This opportunity to define what home meant was mine. As I drove back to Boston that evening, I began making plans. I would keep my apartment for now, splitting my time between the city and my mountain retreat. I would need furniture, household items, all the things that transform a house into a home. And most importantly, I would need to decide how to spend my first Christmas in my new house, a Christmas that would be entirely on my terms. I began the transition to my new life gradually. At first, I drove up to Vermont only on weekends, bringing carloads of essentials each trip. By October, I had negotiated a flexible work arrangement with my firm that allowed me to work remotely 3 days a week, meaning I could spend more time at the mountain house. Furnishing the house became a project that brought me unexpected joy. Rather than rushing to fill the space, I took my time carefully selecting each piece to create the warm, welcoming atmosphere I'd always longed for. A comfortable sectional sofa positioned to maximize the mountain view. A solid oak dining table with chairs that could accommodate future guests. Plush area rugs that added warmth to the hardwood floors. Artwork from local Vermont artists that captured the beauty of the surrounding landscape. Each addition made the space more mine. I painted an accent wall in the living room, a rich forest green. I planted fall bulbs in garden beds that would bloom in spring. I stacked firewood on the deck in preparation for cold winter nights. These small acts of creation and preparation were healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. As I spent more time in Vermont, I gradually became familiar with the local community. The barista at the coffee shop in town began to recognize me, greeting me by name, and remembering my usual order. The owners of the small bookstore suggested local authors I might enjoy. The farmer who ran the Saturday market saved me the best tomatoes because he knew I loved them. These small connections weren't deep friendships yet, but they were acknowledgments of my presence, small confirmations that I was seen and remembered in a way my own family had failed to do. One neighbor in particular became important to me. Carol lived in a small house about half a mile down the road, a widow in her 70s who had lived in the area her entire life. We met when I was out for a walk one day and stopped to admire her extensive garden. She invited me in for tea, and I found myself returning, regularly drawn to her straightforward manner and the wealth of knowledge she had about the area. "You planning to stay through the winter?" she asked during one of our conversations in late October. "These mountains get mighty isolated when the snow comes." "I think so," I replied, "at least for Christmas. I've never spent the holidays on my own terms before." Something in my tone must have revealed more than my words, because Carol gave me a knowing look. "Family's complicated, isn't it? Blood doesn't always mean belonging." I nodded, surprised by her perception, and relieved not to have to explain further. "Well," she continued, patting my hand, "there are different kinds of family. Some we're born into, others we find along the way, or build for ourselves." Her words stayed with me as November arrived, bringing shorter days and the first light snowfalls. With Thanksgiving approaching, I made the decision not to return to Boston for the holiday. Instead, I invited Rachel to join me in Vermont. We spent the day cooking together, hiking through the woods in the afternoon, and ending the evening with wine by the fireplace. It was the most relaxed Thanksgiving I could remember. As December began, I found myself looking forward to Christmas for the first time in years. I bought a live tree and decorated it with lights and ornaments I'd selected myself. I hung a wreath on the front door and strung white lights along the deck railing. I began gathering recipes for Christmas dinner, planning a meal that included all my favorites without having to accommodate anyone else's preferences. But as the holiday drew closer, I realized I didn't want to spend it completely alone. The house felt too big, too empty for just me on such a significant day. After much consideration, I decided to host a small gathering for people who, like me, might not have a traditional family celebration to attend. I extended invitations to Carol, to Ethan and his partner, who had no plans that year, to a young couple I'd met at a community event who were new to the area, and to Rachel, who offered to drive up from Boston. To my surprise and delight, everyone accepted. As I prepared for my guests, buying food and small gifts for each person, I felt a growing sense of anticipation that had been absent from my holiday experiences for years. This was a celebration entirely of my own creation, with people who were choosing to spend time with me rather than including me out of obligation. A week before Christmas, my phone lit up with a text message from my mother. "Nadia, are you coming home for Christmas this year? Let me know soon so we can plan accordingly." I stared at the message in disbelief. After nearly a year of minimal contact after the devastating revelation of last Christmas, she was acting as if nothing had happened, as if I might simply show up at their doorstep, eager for whatever scraps of inclusion they deigned to offer. I waited a full day before responding, "I have other plans this year. Enjoy your holiday." Her reply came quickly. "What other plans? You always spend Christmas with family." The irony of her statement was almost too much to bear. I nearly typed out a bitter response about how they had excluded me for years, about how I had overheard them admitting it last Christmas, about how they had made it abundantly clear that I wasn't truly welcome in their home or their lives. But I realized that such a message would only perpetuate the cycle of hurt. Instead, I called her. It was time for an honest conversation, however painful it might be. "Nadia, I was so glad to see your text," she said when she answered. "We've barely heard from you all year. Is everything okay?" "No, Mom, everything is not okay," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. "I need to tell you something. Last Christmas I came home. I drove to the house on Christmas Eve." "What? We didn't see you," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "That's because I never came inside. I saw the party through the window, the party I wasn't invited to, and I heard what you and Dad said about me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally said, but her tone lacked conviction. "I heard you say it was for the best that I wasn't there. I heard Dad say you'd stopped inviting me years ago because it was less stressful without me. I heard Lily laugh about how you had to scramble to find gifts for me when I showed up unexpectedly one year." Another silence, longer this time. "We didn't mean it like that." She eventually offered, her voice small. "How else could you have meant it?" I asked. For years I've been trying to understand why I was constantly forgotten, left out, overlooked. I blamed myself, thinking I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't communicating well enough. But last Christmas I learned the truth. It wasn't accidental. You and Dad and James and Lily, you all decided I didn't fit in your perfect family picture, so you erased me. "That's not fair," my mother protested, but weakly. "What's not fair is making your child feel unwanted for decades," I replied. "What's not fair is pretending to forget to invite someone to family events rather than having an honest conversation about whatever issues you had with me." "We love you, Nadia," she said, sounding close to tears. "You're our daughter. Of course we love you." Love isn't just a word, Mom. It's actions. It's inclusion. It's making space for someone even when they're different or challenging or don't fit your expectations. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, circling around the same points. My mother alternated between denial, defensiveness, and attempts at reconciliation. I remained firm but calm, stating the facts of my experience, without yielding to her attempts to minimize them. In the end, nothing was truly resolved. She didn't fully acknowledge the deliberate nature of my exclusion, nor did I agree to pretend it hadn't happened. We ended the call with her expressing hope that I would reconsider my Christmas plans, and me reiterating that I had made commitments I intended to keep. As difficult as the conversation was, I felt lighter afterward. I had finally spoken. My truth had finally stopped participating in the fiction that my absence from family events was accidental or my choice. I had drawn a boundary not out of spite or revenge, but out of self-respect and self-protection. In the days that followed, I threw myself into preparations for my Christmas gathering. I decorated the house with fresh garlands of pine and cedar. I planned a menu that combined traditional favorites with some unique dishes I'd always wanted to try. I wrapped gifts for my guests, each one chosen with care, to reflect what I knew about their interests and preferences. As Christmas Eve arrived, I looked around my mountain home, aglow with warm lights and festive decorations, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow, this space would be filled with laughter and conversation. There would be no underlying tension, no feeling of being an unwelcome addition, no need to make myself smaller or less visible to avoid disrupting the family dynamic. I had created this, not just the physical space, but the opportunity for connection and celebration on my own terms. I had turned years of rejection into a foundation for something new and authentically mine. As snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in hushed white, I raised a glass of wine in a silent toast to myself. This Christmas would be different. This Christmas would be mine. Christmas morning dawned with a perfect blanket of fresh snow covering the landscape around my mountain home. I woke early excited in a way I hadn't been for the holiday in years. After brewing coffee, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching the sunrise cast pink and gold light across the pristine white slopes. This moment of quiet reflection before the day began in earnest felt sacred somehow. I thought about how far I'd come since the previous Christmas, from the devastation of clearly hearing I wasn't wanted in my family to creating this new space and new traditions for myself. The journey hadn't been easy, but sitting there in the gentle morning light, I knew without doubt that I was exactly where I needed to be. My guests were scheduled to arrive at 2 o'clock, giving me the morning to finish my preparations. I put the finishing touches on the decorations, adding fresh greenery to the table centerpiece, and lighting scented candles throughout the house. I prepared as much of the meal as I could in advance. A turkey breast instead of a whole turkey, garlic mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and homemade cranberry sauce. For dessert, I'd made an apple pie and a chocolate torte, unable to choose between them. Carol was the first to arrive, bundled against the cold and carrying a beautiful poinsettia plant. "Merry Christmas, dear," she said, embracing me with surprising strength for her slight frame. "This home looks wonderful. You've really brought it to life." Ethan and his partner Michael arrived next, followed shortly by Rachel, and then the young couple Aiden and Sophie, who brought their golden retriever Leo. I had told them pets were welcome, and Leo's excited exploration of the house added an extra element of joy to the gathering. We began with drinks and appetizers in the living room, the fireplace crackling and Christmas music playing softly in the background. The conversation flowed easily with none of the strained politeness or underlying tension I'd grown accustomed to at family gatherings. Instead, there was genuine interest, laughter, and the natural rhythm of people enjoying each other's company. During dinner, as we passed dishes around the table, I'd so carefully set, Carol raised her glass for a toast. "To Nadia," she said, "for opening her heart and her home today, and for reminding us that family can be found in unexpected places." The warmth of her words and the sincere smiles around the table brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you all for being here," I managed to say. "This means more to me than you know." After dinner, we exchanged the small gifts I had prepared for each guest along with a few they had brought. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful tokens. A book Rachel had mentioned wanting to read, a handcrafted mug for Carol from a local Potter artisanal chocolates for Ethan and Michael, a framed photograph I'd taken of the mountains for Aiden and Sophie, and even a new toy for Leo. As the evening progressed, we gathered in the living room again. Leo curled up by the fire, and the conversation turned to holiday memories and traditions. It was then that Carol shared something I hadn't known. "I haven't celebrated Christmas with my biological family in over 30 years," she said, her voice steady but tinged with old emotion. "My parents couldn't accept who I was, who I loved. They gave me an ultimatum: deny my true self, or lose my place in the family. I chose to be authentic, and it cost me dearly. The room grew quiet as she continued. Those first holidays alone were the hardest. But gradually, I built a circle of friends who became my chosen family. We created our own traditions, our own meaning for the season. And eventually I realized I wasn't missing out on family at all. I had simply found a different kind, one based on acceptance rather than obligation. Her story resonated deeply with me, and I found myself sharing the truth about my own family situation, the years of being forgotten, the devastating discovery last Christmas, and my decision to create something new for myself. To my surprise, others in the room had similar stories. Ethan revealed that his relationship with his father had been strained for years due to his career choices. Aiden and Sophie shared that they had moved across the country partly to escape toxic family dynamics. Even Rachel admitted that her picture-perfect family had deep undercurrents of competition and criticism that made holidays stressful rather than joyful. I think many people stay in harmful family situations because they're afraid of the alternative, Michael observed thoughtfully. We're taught that blood relationships are sacred, that family should come first no matter what. But sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is recognize when a relationship isn't serving us and have the courage to create something different. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart with warm hugs and promises to get together again soon, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. This gathering hadn't just been a successful dinner party. It had been an affirmation that connection, belonging, and genuine care were possible outside the narrow confines of biological family. After everyone had gone, I sat alone by the fire, nursing a final glass of wine and reflecting on the day. The house still held the warmth and energy of the gathering, evidence in the dishes waiting to be washed, the leftover food packaged in the refrigerator, the gift wrap collected in a bag for recycling. On impulse, I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the living room, the tree lights glowing, the embers of the fire still casting a warm light. Without overthinking it, I sent the image to my family group chat with a simple message, "Merry Christmas from my new mountain home." I didn't expect any immediate response, and I wasn't seeking their approval or even their acknowledgement. It was simply a small act of visibility, of saying, "I exist, I am here, and I am well without you." To my surprise, my phone chimed with a response almost immediately. It was from Lily. "Your house looks beautiful. Can we talk sometime?" I stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions rising within me. Part of me wanted to ignore it to protect the peace and joy I had cultivated today from the potential hurt of renewed contact with my family. But another part recognized that healing didn't necessarily mean permanent estrangement. "Yes," I replied after careful consideration. "After the new year." Her response came quickly. "I'd like that. Merry Christmas, Nadia." As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the day, the genuine connections I'd made, the honest conversations we'd shared, the new traditions I'd begun. I also thought about Lily's message and what it might mean. Was she reaching out from genuine remorse? Or was this just another attempt to ease family guilt without making real changes? I didn't have the answer yet. And for once, that felt okay. I had learned this year that I didn't need to rush into forgiveness or reconciliation. I could take my time, establish my boundaries, and engage only in relationships that honored my worth and dignity. Looking out my bedroom window at the moonlight reflecting off the snow, I felt a profound sense of peace. The pain of my family's rejection hadn't disappeared completely. Such deep wounds don't heal overnight. But it had transformed into something different, something that had ultimately led me to this place of greater authenticity and self-respect. When I had purchased this house, part of me had seen it as an act of defiance, a way of proving to my family that I didn't need them. But now I recognized it as something much more powerful, an act of self-love, of creating space for the life I truly wanted, rather than the one I had been conditioned to accept. As I drifted towards sleep, a thought surfaced with perfect clarity. When I stopped trying to fit into spaces that weren't meant for me and instead created my own, I had finally found where I truly belonged. And that was the most precious gift I could have given myself this Christmas. I wonder if any of you have ever had to create your own traditions when family ones didn't work out. Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Thank you for being part of my journey, and may your holidays be filled with genuine connections, whether with family by blood or family by choice.